The desert didn't forgive not the sun, not the land, not the men who rode through it with blood on their hands or sorrow in their hearts. A hot wind swept across the cracked skin of Arizona, dragging with it little clouds of dust and brittle tumbleweed that rolled aimlessly across the open plain. The sky was high and bleached, and the heat came not just from above but seemed to radiate from the ground itself. The few saguaro cacti that dotted the horizon stood tall, like silent sentinels, witnesses to things that went unspoken and unseen. William Stone rode alone. His hat was pulled low over his brow, shielding his eyes from the white fire of the sun. Dust clung to the folds of his duster coat and coated the sweat-darkened chestnut of his horse. He didn't speak, didn't hum, didn't mutter. Silence was his closest companion, and today it hung heavier than usual. He was tracking a cow that had wandered off 2 nights ago during a lightning storm. He hadn't expected to find it alive. Coyotes or rustlers likely claimed it, but habit and duty drove him across the Badlands. That, and something else, something hollow inside him that wouldn't rest unless his hands were busy. The trail had led him toward a shallow ridge where mesquite trees clung to the red rock like stubborn old men refusing to die. It was here, just past noon, that his horse slowed, ears twitching, nostrils flaring. William reined in. He felt it before he saw it. Something was wrong. The wind changed. The silence grew unnatural, like the desert was holding its breath. Then he heard it, a sound too soft to be called a cry, too faint to be human. But it was a weak, rasping moan. He dismounted quickly, boots crunching on sun-baked earth, and moved through the trees. A vulture flapped off with a harsh caw. Then he saw it. She was hanging. A girl, no, a woman dangling from a tree branch by her wrists, bound with rawhide thongs soaked in dried blood. Her body was limp, her head lolling forward, dark hair matted with dirt and sweat. Her skin was the sun-dark brown of the Apache, but it was pale now, drained and near death. Above her, nailed crudely into the bark, was a splintered plank of wood, daubed in red paint that dripped and dried like old blood. No place for savages. William froze. The words were a declaration, a sentence, a warning, not to her, but to men like him. His gut twisted. Memories crashed in on him uninvited. A flicker of fire, the scream of his sister, the helpless sound of his own voice trying to shout through smoke as the Comanche raid tore his world apart years ago. He had lost everything in a single night, and from that fire had risen a man forged of silence and stone. And yet, here he was, staring at a woman who looked like the enemy he had once imagined in every shadow. His jaw clenched. He took one step forward. Damn it, he muttered under his breath. Not again. She groaned, just barely. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Her chest rose in shallow, desperate gasps. She wasn't dead yet. William stepped closer and drew his knife. The sun caught the blade, flashing silver. He heard the soft creak of the tree as she shifted ever so slightly under her own weight. Unconscious, he looked up at the crude sign again. Red letters, still fresh. The part of him that had been burned years ago said to walk away. She wasn't his problem. She was a danger. It wasn't to make for him. So, a symbol, a burden he didn't ask for. But he saw something else, someone else. The way her collarbone jutted out, the bruises down her arms, the marks left not just by rope but by men. Rage flared in him, cold and focused. I'm not like them. Never really when I want him, he whispered. Then, is Serenena. Without hesitation, he sliced the thong. She fell forward into his arms like a sack of broken bones. She was light, too light. Her breath fluttered against his chest. Her wrists were raw. Flesh torn down to sinew. He knelt with her beside the tree, lowering her gently to the dirt. His canteen came out, and he trickled water past her cracked lips. She swallowed. Barely, her eyelids fluttered. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask what she'd done. He didn't need to. William Stone was a man who understood weight grief, guilt, silence, and whatever had brought her here had tried to hang her with all three. The journey back was slow. He wrapped her in an old canvas tarp and laid her across his saddle. He walked beside his horse, guiding it carefully through ravines and across dry creek beds. The desert sun dipped low by the time his ranch came into view, a long, low house of adobe and pine timber, hidden behind a rise and guarded by a windmill that hadn't turned in 3 days. He took her inside, laid her on his bed without a word. and stoked the stove. That night, under the soft creak of wood and wind, William boiled water, cleaned her wounds, and bandaged her wrists. She didn't stir. Only once did her eyes blink open. Clouded and full of fear, he held up both hands and stepped back, letting her see the basin of water and the cloth he'd been using. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, and meant it. No answer. But her eyes didn't close right away. They followed him. She stayed awake long enough to sip more water, then collapsed again into the kind of sleep that only the near-dead fall into. He didn't sleep much that night. He sat in the chair by the window, rifle across his knees, watching the door, watching her. Morning came with orange light spilling across the floor. He found her sitting up, barely, clutching the blanket to her chest and eyeing him with a mix of suspicion and confusion. "You're safe," he said gruffly. She licked her lips. "Where?" Her voice was hoarse, more breath than sound. "My ranch." "Sostrikatibim," he replied. "Days ride east of Dry Creek." "You were strung up west of the pass." She didn't answer. Her eyes flicked to the window, then back to him. "You got a name?" he asked. She didn't answer again. "Don't matter. Fury your main never once," he said after a moment. "I'll call you Clara, for now." Minolat Servornan Shom. He left her with that, stepping outside to feed the horses. Inside, Clara, though that wasn't her name, clutched the blanket tighter. Her mind was a fog of pain and broken images. Fire. Screams. Blood. Then the sign, always the sign. But something had shifted, for the first time in weeks. She wasn't running or fighting or hiding. She was alive. And so was he, the man with eyes like slate and hands that didn't shake. She didn't trust him. But maybe, just maybe, she didn't need to fear him. Not yet. The knife still lay where he had left it on the wooden table beside the stove, its blade dark with a faint stain of dried blood and dessert dust. William Stone hadn't touched it since the night before, but its presence seemed to fill the room. It wasn't just a tool. It was a witness, a reminder that something irreversible had been done, not to her but to him. He had made a choice. And in a land like Arizona, in the year 1887, that choice meant more than just the saving of a life. It meant crossing a line. He stepped out into the pale morning light, the boards of the porch creaking under his boots. The horizon glowed gold behind the jagged ridge of red rock to the east, and already the wind was rising, sweeping dust across the hard-packed yard. Chickens scratched in silence, and the well's rope thudded softly as it swung in rhythm with the breeze. William ran a hand through his hair, staring into the distance. He hadn't spoken to another living soul in days, not since his last visit to Dry Creek to trade salt pork for bullets and lamp oil. And now, Istering, sleeping in his bed, wrapped in a blanket that had once belonged to his mother, was a woman who had every reason to hate him, to fear him, to see him no differently than the men who had left her hanging like an animal. But she hadn't run. Not yet. Inside, she was stirring. He heard the low creak of the floorboards as she stood. Then the soft, muffled wince of pain. She wouldn't be strong enough to walk far. Those wrists would take time to heal. He would have to cut more cloth to pad the bindings. Maybe send a message to Doc Elridge in Dry Creek. Though if word got out that William Stone was harboring an Apache woman, he spat into the dirt and turned back toward the door. She was standing when he entered, gripping the edge of the table for balance. Her dark hair had fallen around her face in thick, tangled strands. Her cheeks were gaunt, her eyes sunken. But there was a fire behind them now. Not strength, no, not yet, but something fiercer, defiance. He admired that. "Easy now," he said gruffly, stepping in and closing the door behind him. She flinched, just a twitch of the shoulders, barely visible, but he saw it. "Claramont to Rachel Worm," he said, as gently as a man with his voice could. "You need rest." Her jaw tightened. "That's not my name," she whispered. He nodded. "I figured." Silence, the kind that stretched like leather left too long in the sun. "I didn't know what else to call you," he added. "Didn't want to give away who you were, in case someone came looking." Her brow furrowed. "Why would you care?" No one to share on a water and Jerusalem. William didn't answer right away. He moved to the stove, stoked the fire, and poured water from the kettle into a tin mug. He handed it to her. She didn't take it. He didn't force it. Instead, he set it gently on the table and backed away. I saw what they did to you, he said. What they meant to do, that sign, I've seen those before. He looked past her, as though the wall itself could carry the weight of what he was about to say. When I was a boy, raiders hit our ranch. Kanachurum, Comanche, Chirisurum, or maybe Kiowa. Didn't matter. My pa, my mom, my sister dead in less than an hour. I survived. I ran. And I grew up thinking every face like yours had blood on its hands. Her gaze didn't waver. I don't expect you to forgive me for that, he continued. But I'm done living by old ghosts. That knife, he gestured to the table, that knife didn't just cut rope. It cut something else. Something rotten I'd been carrying for too long. She stared at him a long time. Then finally slowly reached for the mug and drank. Later that afternoon, he found her sitting outside beneath the lean-to, wrapped in the old blanket. Her eyes scanned the horizon the way an animal does, always searching for movement, always watching the edges. He brought her a bowl of beans and a strip of salt pork. She didn't say thank you, but she ate. That was enough. Why did they hang you? He asked quietly. She didn't respond right away. But when she did, her voice was calm. Flatador washed warnen. Ninetun one dead. They said I killed a white man. He kept his face still. Did you? He asked. She shook her head. No, but it wouldn't have mattered. She turned her eyes toward the sky. They burned my village. She said. 6 families. My uncle, my cousin, we lived near the San Pedro River. We had a treaty with the fort commander. But then Bartholomew Kane came, with papers, said the land belonged to him now, that we had 2 days to leave. We didn't leave. William didn't speak. He knew that name Kane, and it coiled in his stomach like a rattlesnake. Land baron, be one of them us is railroad agent. Vulture dressed in a wool suit. They came at dawn. She continued. I ran. They caught me by nightfall. They said I stabbed one of their men. I didn't, but they didn't care. Russian wine and one of the ones who walk in the morning. They tied me up and left me like a warning. She turned to him. You still think I'm worth saving? His answer was not a word. But in action, he walked to the fire pit, grabbed the sign he had dragged home, and leaned against the barn. With no ceremony, no dramatics, he tossed it into the flames. The paint bubbled, blackened, then burned away. The words were gone. She watched it burn, her expression unreadable. Then I'll call you by your real name, he said, stepping back into the light. If you'll tell it to me. She hesitated. Then near Wafornewantin, softly. Dalir, Suri Yurder. He nodded. Tala. The syllables felt foreign in his mouth, wild and proud. But true, that night, they didn't speak again. She took the cot by the window, and he returned to the chair by the fire. But something had changed. Not trust, not yet, but understanding, the kind that only comes from shared wounds. The next morning, the sound of hoofbeats broke the quiet. William stepped out onto the porch just as 2 cavalry riders approached Dusty. Uniformed as just sword were machines, with the easy swagger of men who carried badges and orders. Stone. The taller one called William Stone. Nadirene Wintermarnus is Cinnamon. That's right. The man pulled out a folded paper. We're looking for an Apache woman. Escaped custody 3 nights ago. Dangerous. Allegedly killed a man during a land dispute near the San Pedro. William didn't blink. I haven't seen anyone. The soldier squinted past him toward the house. Mind if we have a look? I do. William said evenly. This is my land. You got a warrant. The soldier grunted, but made no move to dismount. Keep your eyes open. If you see anything, or anyone, send word to Fort Strawn. William nodded once. I'll do that. They turned, muttering, and rode off in a cloud of dust. When William returned inside, Tala was standing just behind the door. She had a knife in her hand. His knife. You lied, man, she whispered. He met her eyes. I didn't pivot her into one-on-one. She stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she set the knife down. Outside, the wind picked up again, and tumbleweeds rolled across the yard like old ghosts passing by. It was the small things she noticed first. The way he kept his distance when entering the room. How he knocked lightly on the doorframe before crossing the threshold, even though it was his own house. How he never asked questions that clawed, never pressed for answers that cost blood. William Stone was not a man of words. He was a man of gestures, silent, careful gestures that said more than most men could say in a lifetime of boasting. Tala watched him from behind the curtain as he worked the land, mending a broken fence, hauling water from the well, hammering a new rail onto the corral gate. There was a stillness to him, but it wasn't weak. It was solid, like the stones that bore his name, the kind of stillness that came from enduring, from caring too much and asking nothing in return. She didn't trust him, but she didn't fear him anymore. The healing was slow. The rawhide had bitten deep into her wrists, and the wounds were red and swollen. She kept them wrapped with clean cloth he cut from a torn undershirt. Twice a day, he handed her salve in a tin that smelled of sage and pine. She never saw him buy it, never saw where it came from. But it worked. Her hands stopped trembling. Her skin began to close. And with every day that passed, the silence between them grew less hostile, less heavy. One evening, he brought her a bowl of soup and a piece of hard bread and lingered a little longer than usual. "You ever cook?" he asked. She blinked, startled. It was the first casual question he'd ever asked. She gave a small nod. "Not for a long time," she murmured. He paused, then slid the pot toward her. "Your turn tomorrow." And with that, Ifito remain was to warn. He stepped outside to feed the animals, leaving her with the faintest tug at the corner of her mouth, something close to a smile, though it faded before it reached her eyes. The days stretched long and dusty, and time moved like molasses left too long in the sun. But something strange began to root itself between the wooden walls of that lonely house. Routine. Each morning, William rode out to check his herd while Tala remained behind, sweeping the floor, boiling water, or sitting quietly beneath the cottonwood tree that shaded the porch. She never left the boundary of the ranch, never walked beyond the dry creek that marked its edge. But she began to move more freely, more confidently. He gave her the guest room. She refused it. "I'm not stirring," she'd said flatly. "I know," he replied, but she slept there anyway. At night, he returned, dusty and sunburned, and ate whatever she had cooked without comment. Sometimes they sat on the porch together. Sometimes he lit his pipe and let it smolder, its scent curling into the wind. They didn't talk about what had happened, not yet, but they sat in the same silence. And somehow, that was enough. One afternoon, a storm broke over the horizon, monsoon clouds swelling black and fast over the copper hills. Lightning cracked across the open sky, and the air turned thick with the promise of rain. William rode in just as the first drops fell, his hat soaked, his shirt clinging to his frame. Tala stood on the porch, arms crossed, waiting. "Storm's coming in fast," he called. She didn't move, just watched him. And then, as thunder rolled over the hills, she asked, "Why are you alone?" He froze in the act of tying up his horse. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then quietly, "I tried not to be. Once it was showing us." She stepped back to let him pass. Inside, he poured himself a drink, just one finger of whiskey, neat, and sat by the stove, dripping. "My father was a hard man," he said, "raised me on discipline and God. My mother was softer. She sang while she churned butter. Always smelled like lilacs. I was the oldest of three." He looked down into his cup. Then came the raid. "I told you before," she nodded. "I tried to start over. Took work breaking horses near Prescott. Courted a girl nice, decent. But I couldn't stay still. Couldn't sleep most nights. Had dreams, the kind that leave you shaking in the dark." He looked up, met her eyes, She left, said I was a ghost trying to wear a man's skin. Tala didn't reply. She sat across from him, her knees drawn up beneath her skirt. "I never tried again," he finished. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. She leaned forward. "You're not a ghost." He raised an eyebrow. "You still bleed," she added. He huffed, just barely. It could have been a laugh. Tala turned her face toward the window. "I stopped bleeding a long time ago," she said. That night, he brought her a small parcel wrapped in rough cloth and bound with twine. She opened it slowly. Inside was a knife. Not large, not crude. A small hunting blade with a leather-wrapped handle and her initials T.N. etched into the base. "I figured you'd want something of your own." He said. She stared at it for a long time before answering. "I know how to use it." she said softly. I know. She looked up. Thank you. He tipped his hat. 2 nights later, the peace shattered. A rifle cracked in the distance, sharp and unmistakable. William was already moving before Tala reached the door. He grabbed his repeater and motioned for her to stay low. Get under the floorboards, he said. She hesitated. I'm not hiding again. His eyes flicked to hers. I'm not asking you to be afraid. I'm asking you to live. She ducked without another word. William stepped out into the moonlight. Rifle raised. Body tense. Another shot. Closer. A warning. Not a kill shot. His eyes swept the ridge. Then came a voice ragged, jeering. Stone, you in there. Issermon Ponirn. Boy. William's jaw clenched. He knew that voice. Jed Carter, one of Kane's lapdogs. A man who beat horses and worse. I hear you've been harboring something don't belong to you. Jed called out. Boss don't like secrets. William said nothing. We'll be back. Jed warned. Ned with papers. And fire. Nanani never surrendered. Hoofbeats faded into the darkness. When William came back inside, Tala was standing with the knife in her hand again. They found me? She whispered. He nodded. They found us. That night, neither of them slept. But for the first time, they sat side by side in the dark, not as strangers, not as prisoner and rescuer, but as something else entirely. Two souls scarred by fire, waiting for the dawn. The sun came late the next morning, hesitant and gray behind a shroud of dust clouds. It rose not with warmth, but with warning, soft light casting long, uneasy shadows across the yard. A hawk circled high above the barn, silent and watchful. William stood on the porch sharpening his knife. Each drag of the blade against the whetstone was slow, deliberate. Clearn, Sir William one, steel against stone, over and over. He wasn't thinking about the edge. He was thinking about time, how little of it they likely had left. Tala emerged from the barn, a bucket in each hand. She moved with the quiet grace of someone who had spent her life around animals in danger both. She set the buckets down beside the trough and looked at him. They'll come back tonight, she said. He didn't argue. I can leave, she added. Now. Is it so? They're looking for me, not you. William shook his head. It's too late for that. Kane knows I took you in. That makes me guilty. Tala's lips tightened. You didn't ask for this. He looked up, eyes hard. Neither did you. By noon, the first rider appeared. Not one of Kane's usual dogs, but a government man, clean-shaven, stiff-backed, with a tin badge that gleamed like fool's gold in the sun. Lieutenant Wesley Boyd, United States Cavalry. He arrived with 2 troopers behind him, dust rising behind their horses like a funeral shroud. Boyd dismounted with formality, boots polished and gloves tucked under his belt. His eyes swept over the house, the barn, the windmill, Chester de Worcester, and Mernayton. They landed on William. Mr. Stone, he said coolly. William nodded. You were visited recently by a party of my men searching for a fugitive woman. I recall. I trust you understand the seriousness of harboring a suspect accused of murder. William's jaw shifted slightly. And I trust you understand the seriousness of dragging innocent people off their land under false charges. Boyd blinked. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. That is a matter for the courts. William stepped down from the porch. I've yet to see a court do a damn thing for folks who don't speak English or own land. Boyd's fingers tapped against his belt. If the woman is here, I suggest you turn her in, peacefully. There's no need for bloodshed. William said nothing. Boyd glanced back at the 2 soldiers. We'll return this evening, with authority. If you wish to avoid trouble, I suggest you have your house in order. They rode off, leaving the dust behind and the promise of violence lingering like thunder. Inside, Tala sat at the edge of the bed, wrapping her wrists in clean cloth. She looked up when William entered. They're giving us until nightfall, he said. Her shoulders tensed. You should give me up. Say I forced you. He stared at her. You think I'm that kind of man? She didn't answer, but the silence between them was louder than any shout. That afternoon, William opened the chest beneath his bed. Inside were 2 things he hadn't touched in years. A folded cavalry jacket and a folded piece of parchment deed papers, signed by his father, granted by the territorial office before Arizona was even a state. He pulled them out, brushed off the dust. These might not stop bullets. He said, but they still mean something. Tala looked at the jacket. You served, briefly, after the raid. I thought I could fight back, do something honorable. But the more I saw, the more I realized we weren't defending anything. We were just cleaning up what men like Cain started. She reached out, touched the sleeve. Why keep it? He gave a bitter smile. I suppose I wanted to believe I'd done one thing right. As the sun began to fall, they prepared the house and William checked the rifle, laid out extra rounds on the windowsill. Tala stacked the furniture near the back door, creating a narrow corridor that could be defended. She tucked her new knife into her boot. Then they sat to it, Schwarzen, together, not speaking, just waiting. The golden light stretched long across the floorboards. Shadows lengthened. The air grew still. And then they came. First was the dust rising like smoke in the distance. Then came the creak of saddles, the jingle of spurs. 5 riders, maybe 6, one wagon with a covered top, and at the center one, to the wide it is riding tall and smug on a black gelding, was Bartholomew Cain. He wore a cream-colored suit and a silver tie pin shaped like a rattlesnake. His beard was trimmed to perfection. His eyes held no soul. Hakuterin. William Stone, he called as he approached. You always were a stubborn bastard. William stood on the porch, rifle in hand, the badge of his old jacket pinned to his breast. You're trespassing, William said. Cain smiled wide. I bring the law with me today. He gestured to Boyd, who now rode beside him. Among the heat the U, Essuentius, Somen, cavalry stands by my claim. That woman inside your house is a fugitive. She's accused of murder, arson, and obstruction. You harbor her at your peril. William's voice rang clear. And what of the claim she makes? That you raised her village and framed her. Cain's smile didn't falter. Savages lie. William, you know that. Tala stepped out from behind the door, then slow. But sure, she wore her scars without shame. I have names, Shirdian, Jordier, Guitars, she said loudly. I remember the faces. I can testify. Cain's expression soured. You're nothing. He spat. A half-dead squaw with no country. William stepped beside her. She's under my protection now. And if you want her, you'll need a hell of a lot more than soldiers with dirty boots and crooked paper. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Boyd dismounted. Stand down, Mr. Stone, he ordered. Last warning. William didn't lower the rifle. But Tala stepped forward. I'll go, she said. If you let him be, William's voice cracked. No. She touched his hand. You gave me a life. I won't let them burn yours down to steal it back. She turned to Cain. Let him go. Take me. Cain grinned like a jackal. But before a word could be spoken, a shot cracked. It wasn't from the soldiers. It came from the ridge. All eyes turned. Up on the hill, silhouetted against the sinking sun, was a lone rider, Sheriff Amos Pike of Dry Creek. He rode slow and deliberate, rifle across his lap, badge gleaming. Sorry I'm late. Needed per secundum, Pike drawled. Heard we were hosting a public hanging without the public. Cain's face went pale. Pike dismounted, handed William a folded piece of paper. How do warrant on a reckon, sir, a warrant, Pike said, for Cain's arrest. Arme fraud, land theft, the deeker, and conspiracy to murder. Boyd looked furious. This is a military matter. Pike held up a second paper. And this is a signed deposition from the territorial judge in Tombstone. Says any claim you have is invalid. The land belonged to the Apache family in question. Cain forged the deed. He looked to Tala. You're free to go, Mrs. Shawarn. Tala stood frozen. Cain lunged for his pistol. He never made it. William's rifle cracked once. Cain fell off his horse, landing hard, blood blooming across his white vest. The rest of the men backed away. Pike shook his head. Damn shame. I was hoping he'd hang. That night, the noose was cut. The nail, driven into the bark of a mesquite tree near the creek, still held a faint trace of red paint. Tala walked there alone and stared at it for a long time. Then she pulled the knife from her boot and pried the nail loose. Back at the house, William stood on the porch, watching her return. You're free now, he said. Tala looked down at the nail in her hand. I was never meant to survive this, she whispered. But you did. Senasurier. Sorry, he said. She stepped closer. Only because someone chose to cut the rope. He nodded. And someone else chose to stay. They stood side by side as the last light faded from the sky. And the wind, soft and warm for once, whispered across the land like a blessing. The fire was lit more out of habit than necessity. Summer still clung to the Arizona nights. But William Stone moved like a man trained to prepare for chill, even if the air remained warm and dry as canvas. The flame danced low inside the hearth, casting flickers of gold across the cabin walls. Tala sat nearby, cross-legged on a Navajo blanket, her fingers wrapped around a tin mug of chamomile. Her eyes stayed on the flame. It had been 3 days since Kane fell beneath William's rifle. 3 days since Sheriff Pike rode off with the surviving troopers in a rattling wagon full of confiscated documents and evidence. The land, according to the judge's seal and the sheriff's word, no longer belonged to Kane's family or any banker with forged deeds. It had no official owner at all, at least none who dared step forward. And no one in Dry Creek would question it if William kept riding his fence line and Tala kept tending the house. But freedom, like fire, had to be carefully fed, and the air was still full of smoke. That morning, William had found her out by the creek again, her feet bare, her hair loose, just like tumem, her eyes reflecting the restless water. In her hands was the iron nail she had pulled from the mesquite tree. She held it the way a soldier might cradle a bullet not yet fired. It was not just a memory. It was a reminder. You don't have to stay here. He had said, watching her from a distance. Not for me. She hadn't turned. Where would I go? Back to your people. Maybe. Or south. Across the border. She had looked over her shoulder then, brows drawn. Do you want me gone? He'd stepped closer. No. But you think I should leave? He didn't answer. Because the truth was more complicated than either yes or no. Because the truth was, he wanted her to stay for reasons he couldn't yet say out loud. In the firelight, she finally broke the silence. You're different since Kane died. He looked over from where he was oiling the hinges of his rifle. Different how? You breathe easier, she said, watching him. Like something that's been riding your chest finally let go. He paused, laid the rifle down. Maybe, Ian, you were hunting him, weren't you? Long before I came. William rubbed his jaw. I didn't know it. But yeah, I think I was. Then why does it feel unfinished? He gave her a slow look. Because justice ain't a full meal. Just enough to keep you alive. She nodded, as if she already understood. They sat like that for a while, two shapes in the fire's glow, both made of shadows and scars. Then Tala said, I want to tell you my real name. All of it. William looked up. Talanihenda, she said softly. Daughter of Yiska and Leah, born near Oak Creek. My father was a peace guide between tribes. My mother wove the patterns of the stars. He bowed his head slightly. Thank you, Jarshibur. She shifted, as if a weight had been lifted from her chest. I want to know your real name, too, she added. He gave a low chuckle. What makes you think I've got one? She smiled faintly. Stone's the name you wear. But what's the name you were given? He hesitated. William Josiah Stone, he finally said, named after two uncles, both dead by 30. Tala reached out and set the nail on the mantelpiece above the fire. Then let's not die with their names. Later that night, lightning cracked across the distant mesas. Monsoon season had finally arrived. The air turned heavy, and the desert scent deepened sagebrush, mesquite smoke, dry earth ready for blessing. A wind rolled through, stirring the grasses and slamming the barn doors. William and Tala rushed outside to secure them, their lantern bobbing through the night like a star trying to keep up. In the barn, hay swirled and whinnied horses stomped nervously. William fastened the latches. Tala calmed the mare with a firm hand and low hum. When it was done, they stood there, breathing heavy, sweat on their brows. And then it happened, like the storm had reached inside them too. He turned. She was already looking at him. The kiss came unspoken, natural as rain. It was not soft. It was not innocent. It was survival made flesh, two people who had walked through fire and were now daring to feel warmth. Back inside, they didn't speak. Words had long been burned away. Instead, they moved through each other's wounds gently, tenderly, like farmers tending scorched earth. Hoping something could still grow, he traced the ridges of her scars, kissed the memory from her wrists. She rested her hand over the bullet wound on his shoulder, the old one that ached before every storm. In that act, something deeper than passion passed between them. It was a vow, unspoken, but sacred, that what had nearly broken them would not define them. Not anymore. The morning after the storm, William rose early. He brewed coffee, set out bread and dried apples. Tala joined him, hair still tousled, her eyes clearer than he'd ever seen. "I want to stay," she said without preamble. He didn't blink. "Then stay, but not as a ghost," she added. He tilted his head. I don't want to be a shadow." Her serenum, she explained, "or a burden you took in out of guilt. I want to work to plant to him. To build something you already are," he said. She shook her head. "Then make it real." A pause. Then he stepped to the drawer, pulled out an old, yellowed envelope. Inside was a paper, still blank, intended for a land contract. He set it on the table. "You want your name here?" She touched the page. "I want our names?" He gave a slow nod. "Then write, Piedmont, Surrey, Surican honor low." They sat together, ink on fingers, paper between them. William Josiah Stone, Tala Nihandam, not husband and wife in the eyes of any preacher, not blessed by rings or law, but something truer, rooted in fire, Suriyar Hamidner Sirwan, sealed in storm by week's end. They'd redug the old well, mended the north fence, and cleared a small patch of land for planting. Squash, beans, corn, old seeds, older hope. Neighbors began to stop by, cautious at first, but friendly enough. Clara Sriti Wasarwanin, they called her, not yet ready to pronounce Tala. She accepted it for now. They asked no questions. Perhaps because they'd all lost something to Cain. And in that silence, community was born. One night, under the same cottonwood where she had once sat guarded and alone, William knelt and set down a small wooden box. Tala arched a brow. "You proposing?" He smirked. "I thought we already passed that point." Inside was no ring, just the nail. He had polished it, tied it to a strip of leather. "It's not gold," he said, "but it held you once. Now it can hold us." She tied it around her neck and kissed him like the land itself was giving permission. The horizon was red that morning, red like blood soaked into sand. A haze of dust clung to the mesas, blurring the line between earth and sky. William Stone stood near the edge of his corral, staring westward, one hand resting on the stock of his rifle. The other clutched the rim of his coffee cup, long gone cold. He didn't drink it, didn't blink either, because the wind had changed, and with it came the scent of old powder and fresh trouble. Behind him, Tala moved quietly on the porch, stringing red chili peppers into a garland to hang above the door. She sensed it too. She didn't ask what he saw, she just waited. Trouble had a way of coming whether you named it or not. The signs came in small pieces. A broken fence post along the northern border cut, not rotted. A calf missing from the herd. Tracks dragged off into the canyon. Boot prints where none should be. 3 men, maybe 4. William said little. But that night, he saddled the buckskin gelding and rode out along the ridge trail with a lantern slung low and a rifle across his back. He didn't tell Tala where he was going. She didn't ask. He came back with more than dust on his boots. "McKinnon," he said, laying his rifle on the table. Tala looked up from the stew pot. "Who's McKinnon?" "One of Cain's old gun hands. Thought he lit out for Santa Fe after the shooting. Looks like he circled back." She stirred the pot. "Slower now. For revenge." This Subernanas. William didn't answer right away. "Then, for profit." Cain had men with him who weren't loyal, just hired. Guns for gold types. I think McKinnon's after what Cain left behind. "A wender you are certain when I know. Worse, money whenever sure." Tala frowned. "There was money?" "Just Sorbinamon." William nodded. Cain always dealt in silver and paper, and he kept a strong box hidden somewhere. Maybe in the canyon caves. If McKinnon thinks I know where it is, he'll come straight here. Tala's gaze hardened. Then let's make sure he regrets it. They spent the next day preparing, same way one might brace for an incoming storm. William checked the roof, cleaned every rifle in the house. Tala gathered canteens, bandages, cartridges, Surinamon some. She pulled her old hunting knife from the mantel and strapped it beneath her skirt. But it wasn't just tools and weapons they packed. It was resolve, Yosin. This time, they wouldn't run. Late that night, a knock echoed at the door, 3 hard raps. William grabbed his pistol, eased the door open with a boot pressed to the inside frame. Outside stood a wiry man with a bent hat and a nervous twitch in his left eye. His name was Toby Finch, a neighboring rancher whose land sat 3 miles east. McKinnon's in Dry Creek. He rasped. Came in 2 nights ago. Drinking loud and mean. Been asking after you. William stepped onto the porch. He say what he wants. Just that he's here to finish what Kane started. William's jaw tightened. How many? 4 I seen him in a shorting warness short toe. Might be more coming. Heard him talk about something they buried out in Gila Wash. William nodded. You got a family. Toby, wife and a little one. Then go. Take 'em south till this blows over. Toby didn't argue. I'll leave before dawn. Before he left, he added, watch your barn. McKinnon always did like fire. The next evening, the wind turned cruel and dry again. Smoke came just after dusk. Tala was the first to smell it burning hay. Animal fur, old wood. She raced outside. And sure enough, the barn was in flames, rising high against the night sky. William burst through the front door, rifle in hand. Get to the troughs, he shouted. They worked fast hauling water, dousing the fence line, beating the fire with wet burlap sacks. But it was no use. The blaze had caught the old timbers fast, and soon the barn was nothing but a charred skeleton. The roof collapsed and glowing red like coals in a devil's forge. One mare got out scorched, limping. The rest didn't make it. Tala knelt beside the animal, whispering to it in Apache, tears hot on her cheeks. William stood above her, jaw clenched, arms smeared with soot and ash. This is how they start, he said. Not with bullets, with ruin. Later that night, with only one lantern burning and the animals huddled in the lean-to, Tala pulled out the box with the land papers. They want gold, she said. We have none. Just this. William took the paper and ran a thumb along the edges. It's worth more than gold, he muttered. Then he looked at her, really looked. I need you to leave, he said suddenly. Tala's eyes narrowed. No, never. If you stay, you'll die. I'm not asking you, I'm begging you. She stepped forward and slapped the paper against his chest. You asked me to write my name here. You asked me to stay. His voice dropped. That was before the fire. Before McKinnon. No. William. That was before I had anything to lose. She touched her chest. It's all I have now. He swallowed, the firelight flickering in his eyes. Then we fight, he whispered. Just before dawn, McKinnon came. They heard the hoofbeats first slow and deliberate, like a funeral march. Then the creak of saddles, the muttered curses, sound of iron spurs on stone. 4 men approached the ranch from the west. McKinnon rode at the center, tall and lean with a long-barreled pistol and a red bandana tied around his neck like a noose. His face was sharp, angular, darmekid mashoworn, and pale as bone. Stone, one, Dieter, Westishernum. Ishern, he called. You in there? William stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. You're late. We're flying on him. I was digging up treasure. Thought you might want to share in the spoils. You buried it. You keep it. McKinnon grinned. Don't be a fool. Stone. I got 10 pounds of silver and a dozen reasons to shoot you where you stand. William cocked the rifle. Tala appeared beside him, her knife strapped to her hip and a revolver in hand. McKinnon's eyes flicked to her. Ah, Sissinawanium, the squaw. Shorter Santon. Heard you had a taste for charity. Tala raised the gun. Say that again. I dare you. McKinnon chuckled darkly. Feisty. Sure you once. That's cute. But his men were already moving. 2 flanked left, the others circling the shed. That's when William fired. The first man dropped like a sack of grain dead before he hit the ground. Gunfire erupted. Tala ducked and fired from behind a barrel. William moved like a shadow swift. Precise, devastating. His shots found bone. Her blade found breath. The fight was fast and brutal. Smoke filled the air. Horses screamed. And then sudden silence. McKinnon stood alone now, blood dripping from a graze along his arm. Damn you. Throne. The Hawaiian year were done. He hissed. You should have taken the deal. William aimed him on. I did. He fired once. McKinnon dropped on pitchinonino, sorted re face first into the red dust. After the echoes faded, William and Tala stood among the fallen, their breath heaving, their hands slick with sweat and powder. She touched his arm. He looked down at her, saw no fear, only fire. Together, they buried the dead in the canyon pass, beneath the juniper trees. No markers, just silence, and the smell of gun smoke fading on the wind. That night, The horizon burned gold again, not with fire, but with light. The storm had passed, and peace, tentative as a newborn foal, stepped into the clearing of their lives. They stood on the porch, side by side, watching the stars emerge. Tala held his hand. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Not a damn second." She leaned into him. And the wind, warm and gentle now, carried the smell of wet sage and clean earth. The law didn't come with sirens in the West. It came with hooves. 4 days after McKinnon fell in the dirt, a cloud of dust rose on the road from Dry Creek. William spotted it first while splitting fence rails out back. He didn't call out, just laid the axe down slow and steady, wiped his hands on his trousers, and walked to the porch. Tala joined him moments later, wiping flour from her fingers. She had been kneading bread. "Visitors?" she asked. He nodded once. "The wrong kind." From the dust emerged 2 deputies and a third man lean. Weary Ikememo, wearing a black coat and wide-brimmed hat that screamed federal authority. His horse was a sleek sorrel, boots polished, spurs silent, a badge glinted on his chest. Territorial Marshal. William's stomach nodded. The kind of man who didn't care about small-town justice, the kind who came with papers, questions, and sometimes one to itanimum, chains. Marshal Elias Grant dismounted, removed his gloves 1 finger at a time. His face was pale, lips tight, eyes like polished slate. "William Josiah Stone?" he asked. William stepped forward. "That's me." And the woman known as Tala Nahanda. Tala didn't flinch. The marshal nodded slowly. "You're both under official review concerning a series of killings reported outside this property, McKinnon and his men. They came with fire," William said evenly. We answered. "I'm not here to judge yet," said Grant. "I'm here to ask questions and determine whether justice was served or circumvented." Tala folded her arms. "And what about the fire that burned our barn? The horses they shot? The land they tried to steal?" Grant looked at her. "I have no evidence of that. No official complaint. No survivors either," William said grimly. Grant paused. "Which is exactly the problem. They brought no arrest warrants yet." But Grant insisted on staying 2 days, lodging in Dry Creek, gathering statements from anyone who'd speak. Word spread fast. Most folks in town had no love for Kane or McKinnon, but Marshal Grant had an air that made even the guilty feel innocent just for being quiet. On the second night, he returned to the ranch alone. He didn't sit. He stood near the hearth, watching the fire. Arms folded like a man pondering scripture. "You served in the cavalry, Mr. Stone," he said without looking. "Briefly, you killed in uniform." William nodded. "I did. You know the rules of engagement. Those rules don't always survive contact with the frontier." Grant finally turned. "That's what worries me." Tala sat beside the fire, sewing a tear in William's coat. "What do you want?" Marshal wanted. Grant's voice softened. "To make sure the right people die in this country, and that the law doesn't lose its meaning just because the wind blows a certain way." William crossed his arms, then asked the right questions. Grant reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. A man named McKinnon had a bank account in Prescott. The day before he rode here, he withdrew everything $420 in cash. "That money's missing." William's eyes narrowed. "You think we took it?" "I think if you didn't, someone else might have, but it makes your story harder to defend." Tala stood. "We buried his men in the canyon. You want to dig them up and ask them where the money went." The marshal didn't respond. He simply placed the paper on the table. "If you find anything money, weapons, anything unaccounted for, you bring it to me. Otherwise, I'll be forced to assume it was motive, not self-defense." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "I've seen good people hang for less. Don't let me find out you're one of them." And then he was gone. That night, the silence between William and Tala wasn't heavy. It was sharp, like walking a ridge with wind on both sides. Finally, she said, "We didn't take a thing." "I know. Osfraninum," he replied. "But he doesn't." "No," William admitted. "And maybe he never will." Tala walked to the hearth, took down the nail from its leather string. "I'm tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of people thinking our lives are worth less than a paper seal." He stepped toward her. "Then we face it. Together." She touched his cheek, not with silence, with truth. And so no one. The next morning, they rode into Dry Creek, side by side. William wore his cavalry jacket. Tala braided her hair in the old way, marked with red yarn that meant survival. Heads turned as they passed. No one whispered. No one cheered either. But they watched in Nekonoponosur, in the sheriff's office. Marshal Grant looked up from his desk. William laid something on the table. Not a confession, not the missing money, but Kane's old journal salvaged from a hidden drawer in the barn before it burned. Tala had found it weeks earlier. Among the ruins, inside were names, payouts, Puerntun, Mapsis Surin Fumanton, letters written to McKinnon, detailing a scheme of land theft, forgery, and targeted violence toward tribal homesteads. Grant read silently for a long while, then closed the book. This is damning. It's the truth, William said. It should have come earlier. It came now. Tala replied. While we're still alive to give it. Grant leaned back. You've saved yourself a rope, he said quietly. And maybe others too. The charges were dropped within 2 days. Word spread faster than wildfire. William Stone and Tala Nahanda had cleared their names with hard proof. Not just bullets. Some called them lucky. Some called them righteous. But none called them criminals anymore. That night, the stars seemed closer than usual. Under the open sky, William stood beside the corral with his arm around Tala's waist. The land rolled out before them like a promise scorched in places, yes, but still breathing. Marshall left, she murmured. Back to Tucson, probably chasing ghosts elsewhere. Tala looked up. Do you still see ghosts? He was quiet for a moment. Then, Edith warned Florence, sometimes, but not as often. Do they speak? Only to remind me I ain't one of them. She rested her head on his shoulder. You're not? No, he said. Not anymore. She smiled. Then maybe justice does ride alone. But love? He Peter. Love stays. He finished. They stood like that until dawn colored the sky again. Until the ghosts faded with the night. The land didn't change all at once. It never did. It shifted the way a river carves stone slow, deliberate, and without apology. One day the wind blew west instead of east. One spring, the dry creek ran wet again. A single bloom sprouted from the cracked red earth near the front gate. And Tala bent to touch it with reverence, as if it were a sign. And maybe it was. After the smoke cleared and the gunpowder faded, life did not return in a roar, but in a whisper. William and Tala didn't speak much of what had happened. They didn't have to. The ashes of McKinnon, the ferrum, the bullet wounds and the brush with the law, all of it lingered in the silence between them. But instead of haunting them, it shaped something sturdier than fear, something called peace. The first true sign of healing came from the earth itself. The rains that summer came early and hard. Unforgiving downpours turned the dust to mud. And for once, the crops at the edge of William's land sprouted more than weeds. Beans coiled around fresh stakes, and the tomato plants took root. The orchard, only 5 trees in all, grew taller under the coaxing of sun and storm. In the evenings, William walked the rows with a hand on his lower back, not from pain, but from habit, a posture of an aging man who had lived through too much and come out the other side still breathing. Inside the house, Tala sang softly while she cleaned. Her voice had returned, not just the physical one, but the emotional one. She hummed in Apache melodies and English hymns, old campfire songs and lullabies her mother used to sing when the stars were bright and the wolves far off. William stopped to listen every time. He never interrupted. That voice had once been a lifeline in the dark. It was home. They had visitors. Not many, but enough. Toby Finch came back one day with a gift, 3 pullets, and a smile, telling them his land had held through the season, thanks to a few tricks William had passed on. He didn't mention McKinnon. Didn't need to. The look in his eyes said it all. You survived, and that means maybe we all can too. Ruth Carter from town brought Tala seeds for herbs lavender, sasagermine, chamomile, women in town, even the ones who had once crossed the street to avoid Tala, began to nod, then smile, then speak. Some brought cloth, some brought jam. The widow of a Union captain offered a dress she'd sewn decades ago for a daughter who never returned from the war. She'd have liked you, the woman said simply, pressing the fabric into Tala's hands. Tala had cried after she left, but not out of sorrow, out of something softer. Tala was 6 months pregnant when the coyote came. It was dusk. The wind had dropped to a hush, and the air was heavy with the scent of sage and smoke. William was chopping wood. His shirt darkened with sweat. Tala sat on the porch, her hand resting on her belly. The coyote appeared at the edge of the field golden gray, lying in a sort of lean and limping. One leg hung useless, likely caught in a trap or twisted in a chase. It stared at them across the distance, unblinking. Tala rose slowly. "Let me," she said. She walked barefoot across the field, moving low and careful, her voice soft in a language older than the fences, older than the land grants, older even than the gun that rested beside William's hand. She knelt 10 feet from the animal and opened her palms. The coyote didn't run. It didn't come forward either, but it sat. And in that gesture was something sacred. Tala whispered a blessing, then stood and walked back. "I used to dream of wolves," she said. William looked at her. "And now, when the form," she touched her belly. "Now I dream of trees." In early July, the child arrived. The sun was merciless that day, furnace hot and unforgiving. The kind of heat that wrings sweat from stone. Inside the cabin, Tala gripped the headboard with both hands and growled through the pain. Her eyes wild, her body slick with effort. William wiped her brow, spoke little, and held her when the contractions came. It was Ruth Carter who helped a midwife. She had arrived a week early, knowing the signs, saying nothing but bringing with her a basin, rags, and iron nerves. The labor lasted through the night. At dawn, just as the first sliver of light kissed the red cliffs, a child's cry broke through the hush. A boy, strong, lunged and full of fury. Tala wept, clutching him close. William, shaking, sat down without realizing it. He stared at his son like he had stared at the horizon after his first battle, awed, shaken. Alive. They named him Jonah Nehanda Stone. Jonah, for the storms he had weathered in the womb. Nehanda Hansor Metu, for Tala's bloodline, resilient and wild. Stone, Surinamat Shuranyuan, for the man who had carved a new path with a weathered heart. They buried the past not in the ground, but in routine. They mended fences. They bottled peaches. They read old cavalry manuals at night and sang lullabies over fresh linens. William carved wooden toys with his pocket knife, horses, bears, wagons. Tala painted them with herbs and wild dyes, decorating their son's world with symbols of endurance and beauty. But they didn't forget. One night, as Jonah slept and the stars blanketed the sky, Tala asked softly, "Will we tell him?" William nodded. "Every part. And what if he asks why the world was so cruel?" He stared at the dark horizon. "We'll tell him that cruelty is a win. But love is the mountain." She reached for his hand. "Then let's teach him to climb." Years passed in the language of harvests and heartbeats. The ranch expanded not in size, but in soul. More animals came. More trees bloomed. The apple tree in the yard bore 5 full fruits by the time Jonah turned 3. He toddled between rows of beans, chasing rabbits and laughing so hard it echoed into the canyon. Visitors came more frequently. A young couple from the east, looking to start anew. A half-blind blacksmith from Tucson, who offered William an old saddle in exchange for fresh eggs. Even Nantan returned, this time with 2 others from the high desert. They stayed 3 days, sharing stories, offering blessings, and marking the soil with sacred ash where the fire had once burned. On the final night, the 3 men danced around a low flame while Tala sang. William watched from the porch, Jonah asleep on his lap, and felt the world tilt into place. Not perfect, but possible. In town, the sheriff resigned and was replaced by a young woman from Missouri. She visited the ranch once, tipped her hat to Tala, and said, heard you grow the best apples in 3 counties. That true? Tala smiled. Why don't you bite one and find out? The sheriff bit. Chudeye, and nodded solemnly. Justice confirmed, she said, and they laughed out loud, without apology. On the 5th anniversary of McKinnon's death, William and Tala returned to the place where she had once hung from a tree. The desert had taken the tree back, weathered it to a husk, cracked and crumbling. The sign Kane's men had painted, "No place for her kind," was long gone, burned in the fire William had set the night he chose love over fear. In its place, they planted a sapling, not to forget, but to mark how far they'd come. That night, as the fire crackled and Jonah slept inside with a toy coyote in his arms, Tala sat beside William on the porch swing. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. He took a long breath. "I used to," he admitted, "back when I thought peace was something I had to chase. And now, if He turned to her, took her hand. Now I know, peace is something you build. She leaned into him. And love, the Sifferufurin, that, he said, pressing her hand to his chest, is something you plant. And overhead, the stars blinked like seeds waiting to fall. The wind still blew in Arizona. But now, it carried the scent of chamomile and mesquite smoke. Not gunpowder, not fear, just a new season, and the promise of more stories. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the dust on your boots, the fire in your chest, and the hush between each gunshot and heartbeat, then like, share, and subscribe to The Silent West, where love finds its voice in the dust, and the frontier never forgets its dreamers. New tales every week. Saddle up. Stay a while.